Antifa proves that feminists can be violent. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and Antifa is at it yet again today in Berkeley, showing that love trumps hate. Now, as an advocate for the gender-specific issues of men and boys, I have personally ran into one particular argument over and over, which makes me want to bang my head against a brick wall every time it comes up. And I can assume other people who care about the male issues I care about have encountered the same thing. That is, the argument that ensues, usually with a feminist, when you try to compare the men's rights movement to feminism. You see, if you advocate for any male issues at all to a feminist, unless you say first specifically that you are a feminist too, the feminist will categorize you as an MRA, even if you don't identify that way personally. And technically, they'd actually be right. You are at least a men's rights advocate, so the acronym is appropriate. However, once they package you with that acronym, they will then try to claim that you are part of a violent hate group or something. They often do this by lumping you and all MRAs with the mass shooter Elliot Rodger, who killed 4 men and only 2 women because they think he was an MRA, despite the fact that there has been basically zero evidence for this. Elliot Rodger was mostly just some messed up dude who happened to have issues with women, which doesn't make him an advocate or activist for male issues by any stretch of the imagination. I am fairly sure he didn't even really criticize feminism, unlike the Montreal shooter from the late 80s who did have major issues with feminism specifically, who is also used as an example of MRA violence even though that was almost 30 years ago. Supposedly, MRAs are the violent ones, according to feminists, because of course, MRAs tend to be men, and women and girls are sugar and spice and would never do anything like that, despite the fact that they actually have done things like shootings, as in, like, when radical feminist Valerie Solanas shot Andy Warhol in 1968. Truthfully, there's probably been several instances of female violence towards men committed by women who might have even self-identified as feminists, but considering how common it is that women identify as feminists as compared to men identifying as MRAs, nobody will label it a feminist hate crime against men, even if you could find the Scum Manifesto right on her bookshelf. But what I think is more important is that while men do statistically commit more violent crime than women, and even if we were to assume that what feminists claim about MRAs being potentially violent is true, simply because they are men, what is left out of this equation is the fact that feminists not only preach violent rhetoric frequently, like the trending Twitter hashtag kill all men, but also we should remember that feminists lie. Kind of a lot. And lies very often lead to violence. Truthfully, feminists lie basically constantly. Because if you are one of the feminists that believes in patriarchy theory, which is almost all of them, you are forced to lie practically all the time, because the theory that all men collude with all other men to privilege men and oppress all women simply makes no sense. And in order to justify it, you have to run around lying constantly, which feminists do. And so here's where I bring in Antifa. Antifa is normally thought of as a strange hodgepodge of anarchism, communism, and occasionally the stray ANCAP. But what I think a lot of people tend to forget is that for complicated reasons I don't want to get into, Antifa members almost unanimously self-identify as feminists. Intersectionals, to be exact. Truthfully, basically all of Antifa identifies as feminists, and I would love for you to test this out if you don't believe me. Find them on Facebook, it's not hard, and look at their profiles and comments from the members of their group, and I guarantee you that it won't take long to verify that these people are, in fact, largely using the intersectional feminist model for how they approach their activism. Are these people mostly dudes? Sure. But that's what makes this even more potent. You see, Antifa is basically the first militant, and semi-organized group of not just feminists, but largely violent male feminists. And here's where it gets funnier. After observing these people for a while, I am astounded by how incredibly clueless they are about their opposition. Not only do they think that all Trump supporters are Nazi fascist Richard Spencer followers, which isn't true by a long shot, as most Trump supporters I've talked to hate Richard Spencer, but even more so, the Antifa people then go on to place even MRAs in the same category as alt-right Trump supporters. I think because of the fact that Antifa uses the intersectional feminist model to organize, which is an extremely hierarchical philosophy that aims to blend every group that might be remotely on their side together into one big mass of black-clad angry mob, they assume that other groups behave in the same or even similar ways. Antifa people believe that they have the anarchists in their corner, the feminists in their corner, the Black Lives Matter people in their corner, and they're all gonna go find and fight the enemy that they think has grouped up in exactly the same type of way, and at least in their little imaginations, it would be the MRAs, the Trump supporters, and the white nationalists all together, even though there are men's rights advocates of every political orientation. That said, these Antifa people have proven themselves repeatedly to be violent, and they not only target Trump supporters, but even just people who advocate for the gender-specific issues of men and boys, assuming that we're all Trump supporters, which we're not. I didn't vote for the guy. But also, the Antifa people even go so far as to call non-MRAs MRAs, simply because they are eager to brand people as their enemy. So next time some feminist talks about killing all men, or talks about any sort of violence, and then plays the woman card and act like it doesn't matter because women apparently aren't violent, remind that feminist about Antifa. Drop me a comment, help me out on Patreon if you think I seem cool, and stay tuned.